Hey everybody, I'm Allie, and today I want to talk all about teaching, which is something very near and dear to my heart. So our objectives for this talk are to know the different ways that you can teach, to be able to coach some students on a learning mindset and what that looks like, know the mechanics of teaching a lesson and what goes into it. And then also, I'll just give you oodles and oodles of teaching advice. So why am I talking about this? So I quit coding in college because it just did not click with me. And I think that the instruction could have been better. And I think that's a universal rule within computer science programs. I also studied education in college. I was an education minor. And then I accidentally became a software engineer later after college. And I got more involved with the community and learned about coding bootcamps where I became a teacher. And then my job became to teach people how to code, but also how to teach teachers how to teach. And so I want to today teach you a lot of those learnings that I had over the years, both through my educational process and also through my teaching experience. And right now I work as a developer advocate and a manager of developer advocacy at EWS. And so I get to use a lot of these teaching tips in a different format in that role. So overall, I've taught thousands of people in person to code, and I've contributed to millions of others learning online through asynchronous resources like blog posts and YouTube videos, and talks like this too. So I've taught newbies how to code, kids, which are always so fun, engineers and junior devs. I've also been a lead engineer, so I can talk through that process as well. So you may be thinking right now, I'm a software engineer at a tech conference. Why am I sitting through a talk on teaching? Well, you probably actually teach already in some capacity. And if you don't already, you really should. So you probably answer questions online. You may mentor a junior developer on your team or an intern. You may create content, so you might write blog posts or create YouTube videos. All of these are ways that you teach. In addition, I'm a people manager, and maybe you will be right in your career or you are already. So this all applies to that as well. And it applies to speaking as well. So you'll actually see me follow my own teaching rules throughout this talk. So why should you teach though? If you're not already, or if you're wanting to expand what you're doing, what should you do? So first off, I have learned so much from teaching other people. For example, how to build an Express CRUD app in a few minutes, the history of JavaScript and JavaScript fundamentals. In addition, I started blogging in order to learn myself and to have to really deep dive into something, because one of the best ways to learn something in depth is to teach it to somebody else. In addition, as you grow in your career, you're often going to have to delegate things to other people. And so if you can teach them how to do your job, that's going to save a lot of work for you. In addition, it's kind of funny, but people start looking at you as an expert when you start teaching that thing to other people. So that's another incentive for a lot of people as well. And on a less selfish note, you can help other people and help their journeys as well. So let's talk a little bit about the mindset that you should have both as a teacher and that you should be instilling in your students. So first off, learning is hard, especially code. And I dropped out of computer science again during my junior year of college. I thought coding just was not for me. And I've since had some sort of coding role for around 8 years and had multiple leadership roles within there. And so learning is really, really, really hard for everybody. And so be empathetic and don't expect everything to click immediately for everybody. Put yourself in their shoes. It's all about empathy. What are they struggling with? And meet them where they're at. I kind of stand by the fact that somebody who's an intermediate at a topic is usually the best teacher for it, because they just went through the learning process and they know the struggling points. Also, think about the lives outside of what you're teaching. If you're at work, think about their lives outside of that, especially right now. So I bring up this diagram. This is the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and people need basic safety before they need to have deep understanding of complex topics. So be empathetic towards that, especially when people are dealing with hard times like they are in the pandemic. So now, what mindset should you instill within your students? So a huge thing is having a positive mindset. Carol Dweck wrote this amazing book called Mindset, and it has this thesis that people should have a growth mindset, which means that people believe that they can develop their own abilities and their starting talent is just a starting point. People aren't innately gifted with the ability to learn. Anybody can learn something. And so this view creates a level of learning and a resilience that is essential for accomplishment. It's been proven that having a growth mindset is one of the biggest predictors of success. So make sure that your students believe that they can learn the thing. Don't make it seem like it's this incredibly hard thing that only experts can learn. Make it so that it's digestible to them and make it so that they feel like they can learn these things. So instill confidence within them and celebrate their wins. Also know that learning can be really emotional, and it's usually not this straight linear process, and confidence can often be shaken. So this is a diagram that I would show students on every first day of their class, where you start off so optimistic that you're going to be able to learn this thing because you don't know anything about it yet. And then you start to learn and you're like, oh my goodness, this is really difficult. And then you get to a point where you're in the valley of despair, where you don't think that you can learn that thing. And then you come out the other side and start the cycle all over again. And sometimes you go through this cycle over and over again within an hour. It doesn't necessarily need to just be one wave. It is a repeating process. In addition, if you can teach students early on to teach themselves, that is so much more valuable than just the knowledge that you can impart upon them. Especially as developers, we are constantly learning. If I just stayed with jQuery early in my career and didn't move on to learning React and all that, then I would be pretty stuck as a developer. You need to be constantly learning. And so teach students how to teach themselves these things down the road. How do you Google well, for example, or how do you find resources that are good online? Teach them to teach themselves. Don't just teach them the fact-based knowledge. In addition, build a space where everybody feels comfortable contributing. So don't allow certain people to just dominate the conversation. Make sure that everybody feels comfortable and welcome. I used to start day one of every program that I taught with my students creating a classroom constitution of behaviors that they would like to see from each other. And I think this is even important as when you're building a team. Think about making sure that everybody feels comfortable contributing and meet them where they're at. Everybody's personality is going to be different. So some people are going to be more comfortable coming to you in a text-based format, and some are going to be more comfortable in speaking. Also, have some room for reflection so that people can keep improving their own learning processes. Also, this will give you feedback as a teacher of what to tweak and what to improve upon yourself. So I used to host retrospectives, and I do this for my team now as well. Make sure that people have room to reflect on what they're learning and how to keep growing. So let's dive into the nitty-gritty here. What should you be adding to a lesson? So the first part is learning objectives. What are they going to learn? Adult learners especially like to know where you're going. It's like an intro section in a blog post. You should have this basic outline of what people are going to learn and why they should keep learning that thing. And then there's the framing, and this is why is what they're learning important? Why should they care? Put it in context for them. For example, with React, are a lot of companies using this? Is it something that they should learn in order to get a job? Is it something that's going to make their lives as developers on a day-to-day basis easier? Why is this something that's important that they should learn? The next part is the meat of the lesson, which is I do, we do, you all do, and then you do. And this sounds like a lot of doing. And essentially what this is I start off by explaining something. That's the I do. Then we do is we do the thing together. So maybe we do a code along where I am writing code and everybody is writing code along with me. Then you all do. This is an exercise that groups of students do. This allows some students to help out other students in their group. And then you do, which is the individual part. And I follow this for all the workshops that I teach as well. Hands-on practice is the most important part of this, and appreciate the process over the results with this. It's all about that learning process. Don't worry too much about what you're actually coming up with at that time. Make sure that you're learning as much as possible and trying to reiterate all that information to them. Then checks for understanding. So this is a huge part as a teacher to make sure that your students are actually understanding what they are being taught. So you can ask them to explain the topic back to you. I so appreciate some of the PMs on my team who do this to me after they ask me to read their documents, where they ask me pointed questions about what I got from the document and make sure that what I got from it was what they wanted me to get from it. And so this is a similar thing within the classroom, but it also applies to other things as well. Now let's talk a little bit about classroom culture and making it so that people can feel comfortable. So first off, know your audience. This is something that I do with all of my blog posts and content that I create out there. I am writing it to one person in mind. Who is the ideal person that's going to read this? And usually much more than that one person, but thinking about who is the ideal customer for this or the ideal reader. And what are the things that they're struggling with? What are the points in their career that they're at? Are they a beginner? Are they an expert? Are they a startup founder? What is their place that they're at? Write to that person, because otherwise you're going to be adding in jargon that a beginner doesn't understand, or you're going to be explaining jargon that an expert is going to very much understand and doesn't need an explanation to you. So think about that one person rather than writing to everybody. If you're trying to hit everybody, it's going to hit nobody. I also, when I'm teaching a workshop, I like to survey the audience to see where they're at and their understanding of a topic. And so knowing your audience is really one of the most important pieces of teaching. The next thing is to set clear expectations. This goes back to the learning objectives, but having some sort of syllabus or even pre-giving lessons. Like I would always give out my lessons ahead of time so people could pre-read through them if they thought that that was going to help them understand the information better. In addition, when I'm giving conference talks, I usually like to give the slides up front so that if somebody's more of a visual learner, they can follow along in that written format if they need to. In addition, create a safe place to fail. I think a lot of people are used to not seeing those red error messages when they're starting to code. And so make it so that they know that everybody's going to hit those error messages. They're not alone in that. They're allowed to have issues. They're allowed to have bugs. They're allowed to go down the wrong path at first. That's perfectly normal. You need to create that safe place for them to fail. And this is so important as a manager as well. Make sure that people are able to take risks within reason so that they can learn and grow. They're not just taking the easy path every single time because they know that they're going to be successful. In addition, it's so powerful when you can have one student teach another student. This will reinforce their knowledge. Again, the best way to learn something is to teach somebody else. And so you want to impress that upon your students as well. And this is so nice to see as a manager too, when my managees are teaching each other things. That makes my life easier, but it also makes it so that they can explain something better as well. I would also mirror the career world in the classroom. So for example, when I was teaching full-time, I would have stand-ups. I would make them submit their homework through pull requests and use GitHub issues for their class questions. This mirrors what they do as developers. And so if you can start that process as early as possible, that's going to be beneficial for everybody. But also make it fun sometimes. So I always, with my blog posts, will have fun examples. Like I have Britney Spears APIs and Ariana Grande examples, and that will make it so that people are more engaged and wanting to learn these things. It's going to meet them where they're at. So let's move into some general teaching tips. So the best way for people to learn is to link new information to information that they already know. And I do this myself when I'm learning something new. I use Obsidian, which is a learning management, or it's a knowledge management system. And I use that to link new information that I'm learning to the stuff that I already know. And that's going to make it so that it sticks better. Also makes it so that I can aggregate that better for future content if I want to create new information on that in the future. So this is so important when you're teaching. Don't teach these things in isolation. For example, if you're teaching them variables, say you probably have seen something like these in algebra class when you were in school. Don't teach these things in isolation. Teach them in context. In addition, the idea of learning styles is pretty overrated. I hear people always giving the advice to find your learning style and to use that when you're learning something new. And the scientific research actually says that learning styles are mostly BS. In fact, most people learn best if they learn the same information in multiple formats. So for example, they read a blog post about something and then they watch a video on it, and then they implement it themselves. Appeal to those multiple learning styles. And you can do this even within a blog post. You can write things out text-based. You can embed a YouTube video in there that uses the blog post as a script. You can add different diagrams to break things down as well. These are all ways of teaching the same thing in multiple ways. And that's going to make it so that the information sticks so much better with your learner. In addition, go over the same material multiple times. And that sounds like, oh, I'm going to be boring my reader, but that's not true at all. Instead, it's going to make it so that that information sticks, and it's going to make it so that different people are going to appeal to those different explanations. If you just go over something once, it's usually not going to hit everybody, but if you go over it multiple times, it usually will. And you can make this interesting by, again, doing it in different formats. This is a huge one. So teach what's necessary, not for your ego. If you're an expert in a topic, but you're teaching a beginner, you don't need to give them all these really complex, detailed details about something. Instead, teach what they actually need to know. Don't teach to make yourself feel better. Also, people's attention spans are pretty short. So this is why lectures are a flawed model. And also a lot of meetings are flawed as well. We probably have to see that a lot within the pandemic of having back-to-back meetings all day, every day. So think about people's short attention spans and how you can vary information to make it more interesting. So is that they read an article first and then they do a code demo and then you talk to them about it for a little bit? Or within a blog post, do you make a long blog post into a series so that they can take breaks in between those different posts? Or within a YouTube video, can you split it into multiple smaller bits? So think about people's attention spans and how you can deal within that model. And within meetings at work, how can you flip it so that other people's attentions are being met? So at Amazon, where I work, one of my favorite things is that our meetings start with everybody reading a document so that we're on the same page, and then we discuss that afterwards. And then it makes it so that there's two different modalities to each meeting. That's going to keep attention spans better than just everybody talking the whole entire time. In addition, teach to the middle and then give one-on-one attention to the outliers. So there's always going to be people who are going to learn faster or a little bit slower than the rest of the group. And so make sure that you are teaching towards the middle, and then you can have one-on-one attention for those outliers after the fact. So you can give more challenging things to the people who are learning things easily. You can also give supplementary information for the people who are struggling a little bit more. You can also do this within activities, so you can have bonus questions that people answer if they've finished the basic set of questions. This also helps people stay more engaged and tailor their learning to themselves. Also, this is a big one. Tangents usually confuse people. It's important to come off as human, and so integrate real stories and be a real person to people. But if you are teaching one thing and then you start teaching about another thing and then you go back to the original thing and then you go on another tangent, people are going to be confused. So have an outline and roughly stick to it. You can also answer people's questions. However, I would be careful to do that at a regular cadence instead of just answering them as soon as they come in. That tends to confuse people as well, because then the learning becomes less linear. Also, break down jargon. If somebody's seeing something for the first time, make sure that you're explaining it to them in the first couple times as well. So if you are teaching them JSX, you can tell them every single time that they see JSX, oh, again, JSX looks like HTML that goes within your JavaScript code. Under the hood, this is transpiled and becomes a JavaScript object. You can break down the jargon. You still should use it, actually. And I see this a lot where people are like, don't use jargon with beginners. The thing is, they're going to need to know that jargon sometime in their career. They are going to need to know it in interviews, and developers have a shared language, and they're going to need to be part of that shared language. So use jargon, just break it down and explain it to them, and not just once, do it multiple times. In addition, make sure to take breaks and review. So your brain has different modes of learning. It has to have focused learning, but it also needs to have time to process that new information. And the more times that you can come back to that same information, the better. So take breaks, make sure that you're also encouraging your students to take breaks, and even the people that on your team as well. Make sure that instead of just banging their head against the desk when they're trying to debug something, make sure that they feel the comfortable or the comfort level to step away, take a walk, and then come back to that thing. Because if you're just focused on learning, it's not going to go super, super well. I also really focus on this idea of the gradual release of responsibility. And that what that means is that at first, I will be much more hands-on and spoon feed people information to an extent. And then as we go on, I'll flip the classroom a little bit more. I'll make it so that students are teaching each other rather than me as much, and that people are having to read blog posts instead of just always the information coming from me. That's going to set them up to succeed after the class, which is what you really want to have happen. Being successful within those couple hours is one thing. Being successful after that is really much more important. And going back to the idea of questions, if you have off-topic questions, feel free to table those. You don't have to answer every single one. I'll see this a lot with Twitch streams, and I'll do this myself sometimes too, is that there's an endless stream of questions, and some of them are good, some of them are less good. You don't have to answer the ones that are a little bit off topic or that are coming up down the road. You can answer the really relevant ones and then hold off on the other ones. In addition, memorizing things is so much less important than having deeper information about it or deeper understanding about it. So this is Bloom's taxonomy. The lowest level of the pyramid is remembering something. So memorizing the syntax is much, much, much less valuable than actually being able to understand it, which is less valuable than being able to apply it. If they can write the code, that's much better than just knowing how to set a variable. Then analyzing the information, evaluating it, and then actually producing new work off of it is the most valuable. So think about that taxonomy, and if you're setting people up to succeed rather than just memorizing something. Doing flashcards on programming syntax is not going to get somebody to actually write a program. They have to actually write the program themselves. So think about that and make sure that you're doing that within your teaching. Make sure that you are reviewing as well. Don't make your lesson be the first time that they're seeing the material. Assign things like pre-readings. You can also pre-give lectures, which I talked about. This is called the flipped classroom. And also that you're doing spaced repetition of the knowledge that they've already learned as well. Seeing information once is not that great. Make sure that they see it over and over and over again. So some more teaching tips that are a little bit more code specific. So use best practices. Don't use foo, bar, and baz as your variable names. People don't understand that. So use the best practices of that language so that people understand that. Also use real world examples. This is going to be much more relevant than using hello worlds all the time. Hello worlds are good, but if you can actually make it real world, that's so much more valuable. Teach the how and the why, not just the syntax. This goes back to that Bloom's taxonomy. Teach them how to implement the thing. Teach them why it's important. Don't just teach them the very basics. Also, practicing a bunch is the best thing that you can do to learn code. So doing is going to be much more important than talking. Also, it's okay to not know something and admit this. As a teacher, it can be like, I don't know that answer yet, but after this break, I'll give you the answer. We'll learn it together. That shows that you're still learning. It shows that you are not lying to them. It earns trust. I also think this is so important with programming interviews as well. I interview a lot of people. I would so much rather somebody say, I don't know that thing yet, but I'd love to learn it, rather than giving me a half answer that doesn't actually make sense. So that's my tip for you. You're getting interview advice as well as teaching advice. Also, review at the end. So I'm going to review all the things that I just taught you. So teaching is probably something that you do already. If not, then you should start. Prepare people that learning is hard, and learning code is especially hard. Prepare them for that and make sure that they have the confidence to be able to stick with it. Here's the structure that I use for a lesson. I have my learning objectives. I have the why it's important. Then I have the repetition of I do, we do, you all do, then you do. Make sure to take breaks and review at the end. And you'll see that I did all of this within this talk. I gave you the learning objectives up front of what are the most important things to take away from this. I gave you why this is important that you already probably teach. And if you don't, you should. Then the I do, we do, you all do is when we do lectures, but you all also are supposed to internalize that and create with it and discuss it. So hopefully you do that after this talk. Then there are breaks. Make sure that people are able to actually ingest that information and have time to digest it. Then review. Here's all of my advice for you. If you want it in one place, you can take a picture. I won't go through all of them because we just got through this, but here's all that advice that I just gave you in one place. And then more resources. So if you want to learn more about this, Make It Stick is an excellent book. How to Teach Online is an online course by Maria Weaver, who's my former manager. This is a really great course on how to teach online. Learning How to Learn by Dr. Barbara Oakley, which is a Coursera course. So it's free. It's a really, really great introduction to how people's brains work. And then Nest Labs has a wealth of information about psychology, which can be really helpful for teaching. And I'll leave you with this quote: when one teaches to learn. I feel so lucky to be able to teach and to be a part of so many people's journeys, and seeing my former students progress within their own careers is almost more valuable to me than progressing in my own, because you can scale so much better through other people than you can as just one person. So think about how valuable teaching is. I, again, absolutely love it and think that it's such a transformative thing for your career. I've learned so much through teaching myself as well. So keep in touch. If you have any questions about this talk or any thoughts, get in touch with me. I'm a Spittel pretty much everywhere. Thank you so much.